Okay. Moving now to the telephones. And first up, from Lynchburg, Virginia, it is Jill. Jill, you're on Radio Free DC.
Hi, how are you?
I'm virile, vigorous, and potent and splendid. All kinds of good things, Jill.
It's nice to talk to you today. I want to bring up an issue that you talk about a lot, and that's honesty out of our politicians that are running for office. And I want to point up an example that's occurring in Virginia right now between Oliver North and Mr. Miller. You're probably somewhat familiar with that.
Yes, I am.
There was an article in the paper last week, and you might know more about this than I got to see, about Mr. Miller had wanted Mr. North to disclose some mental health history that he had, and in return, the North camp requested that Mr. Miller disclose some of his visits to a mental health professional, and they both basically stepped around the issue.
Yeah, well, what occurred, for the benefit of folks who are not living in the Commonwealth of Virginia, as you know, Colonel North is a candidate for the Republican nomination to the Senate from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and so is Jim Miller. Right. Jim Miller being the former budget chief during the Reagan administration. They're both good men. Right. I happen to be preferring Ollie North, but I'm the first to admit that Jim Miller is a fine man. I know him and what have you. Now, what occurred was a sort of a political blunder. Jim Miller did, just as you suggest, want to force Oliver North to reveal the fact that I guess he'd been treated for depression some years ago when he was having some marital difficulties. The whole thing backfired for two reasons. And North said, well, how about yours? And first of all, Colonel North had already disclosed all of that in the widely read book about him, Under Fire.
Exactly.
I mean, everybody knew about that, and not just in Virginia. And it one of those things that's no big deal.
Right.
And then Mr. Miller was forced to disclose that he has clinical depression running in his family or something like that. And it's all a tempest in the teapot.
Right, that's how he dealt with it. He would never come straight up with the facts. And I think in that sense he perpetuated some of the stigma around depression. And I guess that's the problem that I've had with it.
Yeah, well, depression, as I understand it, and you probably know more about it than I do, but clinical depression is a result of a chemical imbalance in the brain, and when people take the appropriate medicine, sometimes it's lithium salts, it reestablishes the balance, and they are fine. If, of course, you don't do that, then you have a problem. Now, I used to debate the late Abby Hoffman. And Abby Hoffman was what used to be called a manic depressive and is now called bipolar. And he had been prescribed, I think it was lithium salts. And I have seen Abby. Abby's the kind of person where he doesn't like somebody else to tell him what to do, including his own physician, which is, not a very prudent attitude to have. And when the times I saw him, when he had not taken his medicine, he was manic. And he really was off the wall. And what I think happened when he committed suicide was one day he decided not to take his medicine when he was in his depressed state, and that was when he committed suicide. But that's just my personal opinion.
Right. Well, I think it's important for them to deal with this issue because they may possibly be setting legislation, if we end up being mandated with the healthcare system.
Good Lord. Let us hope not.
I know. Well, that's what we're hoping. But I just wanted to know your thoughts on it. And I just want to say it's very nice to listen to you. I'm glad you're on the air.
Thank you.
And you're a nice alternative to Rush.
Well, I think that Rush and I are different. And I think that there's plenty of room for both of us.
And I don't think that I think you respect women. I think he has been known to bash on them.
I respect women, yes, but I love women. I love them and I respect them. I just, they're wonderful, and they all have my number. I just can't put anything over on them, and they drive me crazy and make me happy all at the same time.
Well, you have a good one.
I thank you very, very much,
Thanks.
Jill. You've certainly helped make it that.
Okay, bye-bye.
You've just improved my mental health. I just want you to know that. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We have from Karen Ball from Rochester, New York, this fax. And she says, Dear Mr. Liddy, Your Jesuit training is obvious as you speak and debate. It pleases me greatly to listen to you because, like any good debater, you are knowledgeable, organized, logical, and cool under fire. I also enjoy your civility and a courtesy that sometimes verges on the courtly. You present a standard of behavior to your audience that few people practice and that many would do well to emulate. I appreciate the restrained passion with which you present your views and argue your points of contention. But, my hero, you have displayed a flaw in your intellectual armor on the topics of homosexuality and prison guards. I find you contemptuous and condescending instead of your normally incisive and clear-headed self. Perhaps you should consider the advice given by Thomas Jefferson to William Short on 18 March 1792 when he wrote, quote, "Let what will be said or done preserve your sang-froid immovably, and to every obstacle oppose patience, perseverance, and soothing language." Please, Mr. Liddy, please don't lower your standards to those of the great ignorant and indifferent majority of people who wouldn't know good breeding and proper decorum if it bit them on the nose. You and I are part of a small and shrinking minority in a society that has replaced courtesy with casual indifference, where honor is an archaic and outmoded concept, where duty takes a backseat to expediency and honesty is laughable. In many ways, you are an embodiment of the standards that I'm trying desperately to pass on to the next generation. It hurts me to live in a society where virtue is a joke, chastity is ridiculed, virginity is an embarrassing social stigma, honor and duty are outmoded and antique concepts, honesty is for suckers and losers, and justice in the courtroom is as flexible as a houri and knows just as many tricks. How did we ever come to this pass? I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of an Ayn Rand story, and it scares the hell out of me. Sincerely, Karen Ball, Rochester, New York. And she says, P.S., something to ponder. Of the 6 virtues, people only seem to remember the first 3, faith, hope, and charity. Whatever happened to truth, honor, and justice? All right. Let us take these items seriatim. I am somewhat puzzled at the assertion that I am contemptuous and condescending of homosexuals, or the topic of homosexuality. As I have gone to great pains to explain, someone's sex life I consider to be none of my business unless it affects the safety of the Republic. It affects the safety of the Republic when homosexuals seek service in the armed forces of the United States, because homosexuality has clearly been shown to destroy small unit cohesiveness and the bonding of warrior with warrior. And so I am against their being in the armed forces of the United States. I have no problem with them being hairdressers and store window dressers and things like that, because it does not affect the public safety. Prison guards. Yes, I think I am guilty of being condescending and contemptuous of prison guards. But that is because I believe that prison guards deserve contempt and condescension. These are people who put themselves into prison for 30 years, and you have only, it's very difficult for anyone who has not experienced life with prison guards to understand the contempt that those of us who have for prison guards. I've seen a situation where a prison guard has stood by, paralyzed, by their own personal inadequacy, while a front-end loader, illegal to be used anywhere in the United States, slowly, not quickly, slowly and painfully decapitated a prisoner. Another prisoner, violating the rules, broke into a tool chest and got an axe and chopped the hydraulic hoses but it was too late to save the life of that individual. And then that stupid prison guard, after the body was removed, had the front-end loader hose down to get the blood and stuff off it, and then ordered prisoners to use it again. And it's, again, as I said, it's this kind of thing that if you were to use it in the free world, they put you in prison. I mean, this is how stupid they are. I consider prison guards, scum. And I don't have any problem with that, because I've been there, 9 different prisons. This isn't the result of having been exposed only to a few guards in certain locations or something of that sort. All right. The last question was, whatever happened to truth, honor, and justice? And the answer to that is that the Supreme Court of the United States have ruled them out of order. All right.
And it is I, G. Gordon, known irreverently to some as the G-Man. And this is Radio Free DC, the G. Gordon Liddy Show. And in this hour, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to commemorate the first anniversary of the massacre of the Christian sect, the Branch Davidians, who dared to have unorthodox views of Christianity and who dared to believe in the United States Constitution and that their right as free human beings to keep and bear arms would not be infringed. And as a result, federal police, who are now in the habit of making war on innocent women and children in the name of gun control, wiped them out using tanks, helicopters, automatic weapons, a poison gas so terrible we are not allowed to use it in war against the enemies of the United States. And yet, the federal gun police used it against women and children, and subsequently they were burnt to death. This is the first anniversary. And believe me, this is not going to be the last time that this terrible massacre is brought back to the memory of the American people, because something has got to be done about this. And we have as a guest Mr. Jim Pate. A year before the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms massacre, the freelance writer Jim Pate was writing articles in the Social Fortune magazine documenting abusive search and seizure practices by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, warning the reading public that the Firearms Bureau was out of control and in sore need of stern congressional oversight. The ATF was still collecting its dead and wounded when one of Pate's ATF sources called him on 28 February 1993, telling him that he had to get to Texas. He arrived outside the Branch Davidian religious retreat the next morning and has been covering the Waco tragedy, the biggest disaster in U.S. law enforcement history and the biggest massacre of innocent people in American history since the Army used to raid Indian camps when the warriors were away and wipe out the women and children. And he's covered the 8-week trial of the 11 Branch Davidians, recently found not guilty. And he's kindly agreed to lend us his expertise. And Jim, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Liddy. It's a privilege.
Well, Jim, would you just bring us up to date, please, with what has happened since the federal gun control police wiped out all those men, women, and children?
Well, as you know, the trial in San Antonio is over. All 11 defendants were acquitted on the key charges of conspiring to murder the 4 federal firearms agents who were killed, and aiding and abetting those murders. There was a third count, carrying a firearm in the commission of those first two counts. That the jury misunderstood the instructions, and they found 6 people guilty on the third count, while the Judge Walter Smith sputtered and fumed a little bit on the bench, and he said, well, they didn't understand my instructions. So he set aside the guilty verdict. He did the right thing on first impulse. 2 days later, after the press had packed up and left, the two prosecutors, Ray Yon and Bill Johnston, filed a motion to reinstate the firearms verdict. And Judge Smith allowed it. And that changed the potential prison sentences for these people from something along the order of 5 years to 30 years to run consecutive. If Lady Justice can't see, it's because Judge Walter Smith robbed her blind. It was an outrageous miscarriage of justice. I think it amounts to double jeopardy. Judge Smith may have, in his mind, served the law, but he certainly did not serve justice.
Well, now, I take it that an appeal has been lodged with the appropriate appellate tribunal.
It has been filed, and these people, by the way, are now being held. They didn't take them back to Waco. They moved them to another county where it will be harder for their friends and family to come see them. They're being held in isolation, so they can't talk to each other. The federal government clearly has a vindictive mindset. They just want to punish someone for the deaths of these 4 ATF agents, and the people who should be in the dock for this are in the ATF. They're not the Branch Davidians.
Yeah, that's true. Now, by the way, I just wanted to let everybody know, Jim, that we extended an invitation to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and to the Department of Justice to participate in this debate, but they have declined.
They don't have the testicular fortitude to get up in a public forum and defend their actions because their actions are defenseless. I've had 2 other talk shows where ATF members of the ATF had committed to appear in a forum with me to debate these issues, and in both instances they backed out at the last minute. No guts, no glory, I guess.
Okay.
Let me make a quick point here.
Sure.
The crimes for which the 7 Davidians, 7 of the 11 were convicted were aiding and abetting voluntary manslaughter. In other words, they couldn't say specifically that any of these people shot a specific person, but there was reason to believe that they had aided and abetted in their wounding or their killing. To find that, the jury had to determine that they acted in the heat of passion and that they were provoked. Well, my logic tells me if a man is provoked to commit a crime, the provocateur, or the person who provoked him, also must have committed a crime. Therefore, why aren't the people who are running this raid, why aren't they now under grand jury scrutiny?
Yeah. Well, you know, the Department of Justice controls these grand juries, and the problem is we can't very well have the Department of Justice investigating itself. This is why there really ought to be a congressional hearing. There ought to be an independent prosecutor and all the rest of it.
Right, and the solution to this, the supposed solution by the Justice Department, to make sure this doesn't happen again, they say, is to double the budget of the hostage response team, the FBI's supposedly elite strike force, to double their budget and double their manpower. So I guess we're now twice as likely to have to endure outrages against...
What gets me is that they brought in the hostage rescue team. That's the name of the organization that you're speaking of. And of course, exactly, they're supposed to be trained to do exactly what the name would imply, to rescue hostages. Now, let's look at that question. The reason we have statutory rape laws is because the law takes the position that under a particular age, a young girl cannot make an informed consent to have sexual intercourse with an overage male. and that's called statutory rape.
Right.
Now, so that even if you were to take, some of those little kids, some of them are 8 years old, I understand, and have gone up to them and said, do you want to leave or do you want to stay here? Even though some of them would have said, I want to stay, because their mother and dad were there and everything. That's not an informed consent that takes them out of being hostages. These kids were in the legal position of being hostages. They should be rescued, perhaps, but you don't rescue somebody by first pouring poison gas on them that you're not allowed to pour onto the enemy soldiers, and then slamming tanks in there to cut off their escape from fire and all the rest of it, and burning them all to death.
Well, now, I will grant them there were a couple of acts of heroism by HRT members. Ruth Riddle, one of the defendants, was pulled from the fire by an FBI agent who got out of a Bradley fighting vehicle and went inside the building and drug her bodily out to save her life.
Mm-hmm.
However, let me tell you what some of the negotiators at the undercover house across the road from Mount Carmel did when this place caught fire. And I'm talking about people like Byron Sage from Austin, Texas, who was the lead negotiator,
mm-hmm.
and some of his fellow negotiators. They stood outside in the side yard and they took trophy photographs of each other while the Mount Carmel could be seen burning down in the background. Now, is that something that would make your grandchildren proud? I looked at these pictures. I said, this is horrible. These people are sick.
This clearly, they need to thoroughly overhaul anybody who had anything to do with that whole business.
Justice is not done until the guilty, and I mean all of the guilty, are brought to answer for their actions in front of a jury of their peers. And the problem with the federal judiciary today is they don't see citizens as their equals. They see citizens as subjects. They think if they have a badge and a gun, they can do no wrong. And to judge from what happened in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and Waco, Texas, that may in fact be the truth.
Yeah, now there's a lot of people may not know what you're talking about I do, of course, when you refer to Ruby Ridge, Idaho. That's a completely different transaction. Let's tell them what happened to that.
Well, that was a raid. That was another case that was started by the ATF that could have been handled in a very common sense fashion, and instead they wanted to use all this paramilitary tactics and whatnot.
Yeah, it seems to me what you've got here is a bunch of wannabe Special Air Service SEAL-type people.
What they did is they entrapped a guy, Randy Weaver, who's a white separatist who has politics and political and religious beliefs that are objectionable to me and objectionable to most Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But they targeted him. The jury in Idaho decided he was entrapped into sawing off 2 shotguns, quarter of an inch below the legal limit. And they acted like the guy had a whole barn full of M1 tanks or something up there, the way they approached the problem. But anyway, when the Marshal Service went up there to arrest him for not appearing in court, he said he wasn't going to court because it was an entrapment, and he was right.
Mm-hmm.
They spent 18 months and millions of dollars surveilling Mr. Weaver and his family, provoked a gunfight, shot his son in the back and killed him, shot his dog.
How old was his son?
14 years old.
Yeah.
And they were supposedly up there doing surveillance, but they were wearing night vision, and they had on camouflage, and they had silenced machine guns. And a marshal was killed, and after that happened, the FBI hostage rescue team, headed by Dick Rogers, who's the same guy who was in charge down in Waco, went up there. Mr. Rogers promulgated rules of engagement that by any measure were illegal. They allowed the snipers to shoot on anyone who came outside the cabin, whether or not they were armed, whether or not they were presenting any imminent threat to anyone. Shot Mr. Weaver without warning, never offered him a chance to surrender, and then shot his wife through the head while she's standing in the door of his home holding a 10-month-old baby.
Yeah,
These are the same people who then, 8 months later, went down to Waco and were in charge of the disaster down there.
Yeah, in the old days, the FBI didn't do things like that. That was under J. Edgar Hoover. They had, good training, good discipline. Things started to go to hell in the FBI when they brought in that cocktail party darling, Judge William Webster. And then, of course, you had the fellow who William Sessions, who gave over the running of the FBI to his wife.
Right.
And it's just been downhill ever since. Now we've got yet another judge in there. We don't have any real FBI people running the FBI, which is, a considerable part of the problem. The other thing that I want to point out is with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, however, this abuse of the public, making war on the the innocent, it goes back years and years and years. When I came to the Nixon administration in 1969, and I heard then about a then recent situation where there's a man named Kenneth Ballou, I think was his name.
Right.
Now,
right there in the
Kenneth Ballou had a black powder firearm, and he had one of these souvenir grenade casings. It was not a live grenade; it was a grenade casing. And so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms said, "Well, gee, if he's got black powder, it must be to put it into the casing and to make a destructive device. Never mind that he had a black powder gun that he used it for." And so while there's four guys up in his bathtub on the second floor, stark naked, taking a bath, they come smashing into his home down below. He doesn't know what the hell's going on, so he grabbed his black powder piece to come down and see what's going on in his home. He got down to the bottom of the stairs where they promptly shot him and crippled him for life.
Right.
And this is typical of, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They're totally out of control, totally irresponsible, and something's got to be done about these people. Jim, I tell you what, I've been told that something's got to be done about the crass commercial messages, so if you'll be kind enough to hold on, we'll take those. And ladies and gentlemen, while you've got an expert on these several massacres and things like that, and Jim Pate here, why don't you take advantage of it? If you've got any questions, to call in. It's 1-800-GG-Liddy, and by fax, 1-800-937-GFAX. And we'll be happy to hear from you, all of you, on these issues. We'll be right back.
The G. Gordon Liddy Show, Radio Free DC. Now, more from the G. Gordon Liddy Show.
And we're back here at Radio Free DC, the G. Gordon Liddy Show, with my special guest, Jim Pate, who is an investigator. He has been on top of the Waco case since the very beginning. He is an expert on what went on and what went wrong. And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take your telephone calls in a minute, but there's something here that I would like Jim to discuss just for a moment, and that is that apparently Special Forces, U.S. Army Special Forces, were involved in the Waco raid. Can you tell us about that, Jim?
Well, there was an A-team from 3rd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, that was assigned to train 80 ATF agents who were used in this raid. The training occurred at Fort Hood in the 3 days prior to the raid, and they were teaching subjects that were not only violated the training policy that was in effect at that time for a 3rd Special Forces Group, but may have crossed the line, posse comitatus, the law which forbids.
I know some special warfare people, and it's my understanding that they have been instructed that not only, may they not participate in things like this, but they may not give instructions to law enforcement officers in the techniques and mechanics of special operations as a violation of the posse comitatus statute, that it's illegal, and they are so told.
After hours in the barracks at Fort Hood, they were teaching subjects that not only are they not supposed to teach to federal law, to civilian law enforcement, they were teaching subjects that they are not even allowed to teach to foreign military powers. The little secrets that the Green Berets have acquired over the years for clearing rooms and taking down buildings.
Do you have any? For instances or any examples of these kinds of things?
Well, there's close quarter battle, and there's a basic and an advanced program for close quarter battle.
Mm-hmm.
But they were teaching the basics. Number one, they didn't have the time to teach it properly, and number two, when you teach close quarter battle, you're talking about massive collateral damage, massive casualties. Take the building down hard. Now, why is the ATF wanting to learn something like that? And there are some of the guys in the spec ops communities that are not happy about this. And this was not a rogue operation, Mr. Liddy. This has become very routine. They've got SEAL teams, they've got Green Beret teams out teaching civilian law enforcement how to go after criminals. And this is not to deny that
here they weren't even going after criminals. They were going after some religious people.
Well, right. And I'm not even arguing. I'm not arguing ATF's right to go out and prosecute Branch Davidian leader David Koresh for violating federal firearms laws. What is at issue here is a rational approach to a problem. They had opportunities, numerous opportunities, in the 8 months prior to this raid, to arrest Mr. Koresh quietly and sanely, and not endanger the lives of 100 women and children.
Yeah.
But the ATF, they are a hot dog agency, and what they've got to be taught through criminal prosecution if necessary is that the law does not begin and end at an ATF press conference.
Well, actually, what needs to be done, I mean, this has been going on for decades now. What needs to be done is to take the regulatory aspects of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. In other words, the alcohol and tobacco guys who go down to the things and make sure that the tax stamps are on things and everything, leave that part of it and take all the law enforcement part of it and just disband that and bring in the FBI and everything properly trained. You can't have the FBI, of course, engaging in the kinds of things that they were involved in down there, but I don't see any justification for even retaining a rogue operation like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Well, they had, like I said, they had numerous opportunities to arrest Mr. Koresh, and they didn't want to do it. The code word to launch this operation was showtime.
Well, and that's because
they had invited TV crews out there.
Sure, and they wanted all that. They were doing all this to impress Congress because they were up for appropriations.
Exactly.
All these 80-some-odd people died so that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms could get a larger appropriation for Congress. They were playing wannabe Special Air Service.
There was only one agent involved in the planning for the Waco raid, Bill Buford from Little Rock, Arkansas, who had any experience with a raid of this magnitude, and he tried to talk them out of it at a planning conference 3 months before the raid. He tried to talk them out of this quote-unquote dynamic entry where they go up and they knock down doors and jump through windows with their machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have any final say in what they did, but the assistant U.S. attorney who prosecuted this case, Bill Johnston, was already involved 3 months before the raid in the law enforcement planning aspects, which raises a serious question about Mr. Johnston's impartiality to prosecute this case. But Johnston, in a meeting on the 4th of December, 1992, when Bill Buford said, we ought to look at this thing again, what you're proposing is very, very dangerous to any innocent people standing around, Bill Johnston told the ATF agents planning this mission, if you don't choose the dynamic entry option, I will not support the search warrants. He's got as much responsibility for the deaths of these 4 ATF agents as anyone else involved on either side.
Yeah, well, speaking of the search warrants, I understand that from Houston, Texas, Sharon has some questions of us on that. Shall we go to the calls now, Jim?
Sure.
All right. Sharon, you are on Radio Free DC.
Yes, sir. I met Jim in San Antonio at the trial.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the most well-versed of all of us, but I just wanted it brought out that the search warrant itself was invalid. According to a 1978 Supreme Court decision, Franks versus Delaware,
mm-hmm.
that a search warrant is invalid if the agent is misled or lied to the magistrate in order to get it.
Yeah.
And there were half-truths in it, like the farmer that reported machine gun fire previously, and but Davey Aguilera, who was the author of the search warrant affidavit, did not add that McLennan County had investigated that. And I know Jim knows even more about it than I do, but I think the public, you need a whole week's show on this. There's so much material. There's so many things that we've networked and found out from one another, the journalists across this nation. and no national media is covering it. They're discounting it.
And I'll tell you why, because the involvement of guns. And guns has become such a supercharged political issue that people are not interested in justice.
But we have to have the involvement of the children here. I think
that's what's so
it comes down to you tell 10 people and I tell 10 people and they tell 10 people. That's the only way this word is getting out, and that's a crime in itself.
Let me say something about the kids, and this is the selective release of information that the government has engaged in. They played audio tapes from FBI surveillance devices during the trial to the jury.
Right, I heard that.
They excluded portions, and they had portions they played to the jury where some of the Davidians inside were talking about pouring fuel. Well, when you listen to it, what they're talking about is not committing suicide. They're talking about a defensive tactic because they knew these tanks were going to come crashing through the walls sooner or later, and the FBI knew they knew, and they said, well, if they do that, we'll pour fuel on them and we'll try to set them on fire, because that is a tank crew's worst nightmare.
But it should be brought out, too.
What they didn't let the jury hear is you could hear the fervent praying of people inside while you could hear tank tracks turning, you could hear the walls collapsing, splintering lumber, and you could hear little kids crying out in fear for their mothers and fathers. And if the American public could hear that, they would be outraged, because this was so much worse.
Well, I also
the
saw
Chinese did at
picture
Tiananmen
of Byron Sage. The American public would be outraged if the New York Times would put that on the front page. The picture of Byron Sage in his victory stance.
Oh, yeah, right.
With Mount Carmel burning behind him. That was put in court. All the lights were turned out, and it was put on the big screen, and it was a gasp throughout the courtroom, including the jury. There were certain things that were brought out that if we reacted to it at all, even with a smile when it would be something in the defense favor, we were told by marshals that we could not smile, we could not laugh, we could not react in any way whatsoever on that side of the courtroom, because I was on the side with the Davidians. I preferred to go in as a sympathizer rather than a journalist.
Right.
But it should be brought out. It also should be brought out that Jeff Jamar said 9 times in his interview on the 20th that if Koresh had put those children in the bus, there was plenty of oxygen, it was cool. If Koresh had put those children in the bus, they would have survived. In court, we heard the tank driver himself say that his orders were to destroy the entrance to the bus. R.J.
Craig, the FBI agent, that was his first order when he started the tank operation, was to penetrate that corner of the building, spray gas down into the passageway where the school bus was, and deny them access to that area. And in the process of crashing through the wall, a lot of the debris fell onto the trap door that led down to that passageway. And after the fire was over, they found the bodies of 6 women who tried to claw their way through the wreckage.
Rachel Koresh's body, I believe, was found there.
To get into that passageway. And the government's contention that these people all wanted to die is contradicted completely by the evidence.
And by their own
examiner found all these kids in the bunker. They were all under wet blankets, and that's where they died.
Yeah. Well, why did they? Sharon, do you know, or Jim, do you know why did the federal authorities bulldoze the site as quickly as they could? Is that so you couldn't go over there and get evidence like that?
Destroy evidence.
To destroy evidence.
They did that while the fire was still going on.
Any basic criminology course, Criminology 101, in any community college, the first thing they teach you is that you preserve the evidence at all costs. I covered the U.S. District Court trial of Jeffrey McDonald down in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 10 years after his wife and 2 kids had been murdered, that apartment at Fort Bragg was still sealed off. I mean, it's one of the most basic precepts of criminology. And what does the federal government, the law enforcement people do immediately after they've got everything they want? They bulldoze the site and destroy the evidence.
All right. Well, speaking of bulldozing and destroying, well, speaking of criminal things, we're going to have to take a break for some crass commercial messages. And when we return, more of your telephone calls, ladies and gentlemen, on this important topic right after these commercials.
The G. Gordon Liddy Show. You got it. The G. Gordon Liddy Show.
Here on Radio Free DC, the G. Gordon Liddy Show with special guest Jim Pate. We are going into the
investigation of the Waco massacre by federal police of a religious organization that believed in its Second Amendment rights, ladies and gentlemen. And just a program note, we did extend an invitation to the infamous Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and to the Department of Justice to participate in this discussion, but they declined. All right, we have this fax in, and this is from Ted Kuklik, and he is from Los Gatos, California. He says, an aspect of the shameful Waco debacle that I have heard next to no comment on in the media is the advisory role to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the federal government played by the deprogrammers of the Cult Awareness Network. Apparently, they played a central role advising the ATF in the Psy-War siege of the Branch Davidians.
Right. They were, what's his name, Rick, from the Cult Awareness Network.
Okay, well, his
last name eludes me right now.
Well, let me just finish the facts here.
Okay.
He says, I watched the Treasury's Bureau's press conference on C-SPAN when the Treasury Department report was released. I saw 3 different reporters who attempted to broach the subject with the ATF flax get their microphones immediately cut off, and the subject was quickly deflected to an unrelated issue. I think this aspect of the Waco massacre, that is, the involvement of religious deprogrammers in an armed federal government attack on an unpopular sect with murderous consequences, deserves additional scrutiny. I thought we gave up on burning heretics with the end of the Inquisition. Why does Janet Reno still have a job? And he asked me to ask you about the Cult Awareness Network role in the Waco massacre.
They were very instrumental in pushing this forward, and in fact, they had contacted the FBI to try to get the FBI interested in this. And a memo was written in Jeffrey Jamar's FBI office in San Antonio 3 to 5 days before the raid, saying that to date, up to that point, there was not enough evidence to constitute probable cause. It's interesting that if the FBI said there was no probable cause, then the ATF, of course, thought there was. I think, and the Justice Department now denies this, that the Cult Awareness Network leader, and his first name is Rick, and I can't remember his last name, was very much involved, and he has said he was very much involved in advising the FBI negotiators during the 51-day standoff. They have now backed away from that, and in the Justice Department report, they try to say that he offered his advice and that they turned it away because they didn't think he was qualified. There's much evidence to the contrary, and had it not been for the Cult Awareness Network, I don't think this raid would have ever happened.
Okay, and let's see. Let's go now back to the telephones, and from Alexandria, Virginia, up next is Bruce. Bruce, you're on Radio Free DC.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you, Bruce.
I'll make these 2 points real quick. I'm trying to confirm a rumor I heard. The first being that there were some ATF agents that were found to have been shot by some of their own team members. The logic being that the ATF agents were wearing bulletproof vests. To penetrate that, you need armor-piercing ammo, and the ATF agents were the only one carrying that. Secondly, that it was actually nerve gas used, not tear gas. And my third point is, how do you go about replacing ATF bureaucrats that hang on from one administration to another?
Okay, well, the bureaucrats can be changed, especially they can be changed at any time. The Clinton administration could change them now. They could be changed when there is a new administration. There's nothing permanent about the assignment of one of these people. The continued employment, there's rules and regulations about that, but the assignments, they can be put out there, recruiting in Iowa tomorrow.
As far as friendly fire, Mr. Liddy, there was some testimony in the trial in San Antonio. The scene that everyone saw on TV of the 3 agents going up a ladder and through a second-floor window, those 3 agents were Glenn Jordan, Bill Buford, whom I've already mentioned, and Keith Constantino. And Buford acknowledged that there were widespread rumors and some evidence to support them. After they got in that room, they got in a gunfight, and apparently Mr. Constantino shot Agents Buford and Jordan in the excitement. There was also some testimony indicating that one of the fatalities, Steve Willis, was possibly hit by fire from an ATF sniper who was shooting from 260 meters away.
Well, it was wearing a jacket, I understand, a bulletproof, so-called, or at least bullet-resistant
Well, these
vest.
guys were wearing soft body armor, which will stop most handgun ammunition, but are not rated to stop any kind of high-powered rifle.
Okay, well, what
absurdity of this is that the ATF alleged in their half-baked affidavit for a search warrant that these people had high-powered rifles. Well, if they knew that, why did they go in? Why did they go in so unprotected? Why didn't they wear hard armor instead of soft?
Well, something else that I read, and I was just wondering if you could shed any light on it, and that is that some of the fatalities were penetrated through the body armor by bullets of the kind which are denied civilians. They're available only to law enforcement personnel because they are designed to defeat body armor.
Well,
But that would indicate that they were shot by their own people.
Well, one we know for sure was Glenn Jordan. He had a 9mm Hydra-Shot bullet taken out of the back of his arm, and that is the type of ammunition that the ATF said that they were using. Soldier of Fortune had a source that indicated that the ATF had some of their agents issued something that was described to the magazine as a cyclone bullet, which is basically it was a hollow core steel bullet like a flying cookie cutter that would penetrate most body armor. There were definitely friendly fire casualties, and the ATF denies this to this day, but the evidence is to the contrary. And it just shows you the level of ineptitude that these guys who are carrying off this raid suffered from. These people were not well trained. I don't care how many times they say what a great plan they had and how much they were trained. I've talked to some of the people who trained them from Fort Bragg, and these people say that these guys were a bunch of bumbling idiots. One thing that they stressed over and over and over when they're training these people is you don't do this in the daylight. Well, of course, the ATF didn't want to do it at night because the TV cameras can't film, and this was all a big publicity stunt that literally backfired in their face. And the people who planned it, as I've said over and over, and I'll keep saying it over and over, they ought to be prosecuted for criminal negligence.
What of the nerve gas? And I'm curious, were any autopsies performed on any of the burn victims?
Oh, they were all autopsied, and some of them are still being identified through DNA and very sophisticated identification techniques.
Yeah, the caller has a point. I've read...
well, the CS is not really a gas. It's a suspended crystalline particulate, and it's been outlawed for use on the battlefield without a specific presidential finding. And that's why Janet Reno had to call Bill Clinton on Sunday and tell him that they were doing this because they were using CS. Now, whether that's the pathology of CS, you'd have to ask a scientist, and whether it's a nerve agent per se. I know it's some nasty stuff. I've been